of a series of webinars we've been running over the last number of weeks in relation to deployment automation. This is part 4 of 5, and what we're going to be focused on today is WebSphere application server. The session should take roughly 45 minutes maximum, hopefully including Q&A. In terms of the people we've got on the call from Midvision, we've got myself as the host, it's Andrew Turner, VP of Marketing, and we also have Dr. Richard Bettison, who's the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Midvision as well. In terms of the agenda for today's session, we're just going to briefly go through the webinar logistics initially to help you understand how we're going to run the webinar, then cover the purpose of today's session, and then cut straight into the detail of a few slides to cover the actual context and explain to you how Rapid Deploy and WebSphere applications can be managed, including actually a live demo as well, which you should find quite useful. We'll then wrap up with a Q&A and covering any Q&A that comes up during the session, and also just some further information you may need towards the end of the session around follow-up information you may need. So without any further ado, we'll just get into the details. Webinar logistics. So as we said, we're going to run this for about 45 minutes. We're going to be recording this webinar. Everyone will be muted during the webinar, so if you do have any questions you want to propose to the team, then please just do that through the panel on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar panel, where you can enter that, and we'll then pick those up as we go through the session and cover that at the end. In terms of today's session, as we mentioned, we've been running these series of webinars on enterprise deployment automation. The idea today is to focus on a specific capability and stack in this area, which is the IBM WebSphere application server, to really help you understand how you can combine the rich functionality and capability of Rapid Deploy from Midvision to help you manage your WebSphere investment and WebSphere estate. What we're not going to be able to cover in probably enough detail for people who want some further information is actually a full introduction and deep dive of all the capabilities of Rapid Deploy. But if you do want to cover that, we can obviously cover that offline as separate sessions, particularly to yourselves. So without any further delay, I'd like to just hand over to Richard Bettison to cover the particular session on WebSphere application server. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Yes, let's get straight down to it then on WebSphere application server. Rapid Deploy can be used to deploy many technologies, and we've got a number of other webinars that will demonstrate that, but today we're just going to be looking at WebSphere application server. So let's first of all have a quick look at Rapid Deploy. Now there are other sessions that cover this in more detail, but it's just a quick look at the key concepts of Rapid Deploy. So Rapid Deploy, essentially the main object that we look at is the orchestration project, and this is an object that basically integrates with your SCM system where all the files, etc., are stored that comprise your project. It also consists of an environment-neutral orchestration that basically defines all of the steps that you're going to go through for this particular deployment. So it might, for example, expand some EAR files, collapse EAR files, copy files around, and in this case today, we'll do a WebSphere deployment. So then we also have the concept of a server in Rapid Deploy, and this is a target environment or a target architecture. It might be Linux, Unix, Windows, whatever, that you're actually going to connect to. And then we have a target environment, and this target environment really defines the configuration of the actual environment that we're going to connect to. So in the case of WebSphere, this would be typically a WebSphere cell, or in the case of WebLogic, for example, it might be a domain. But really today, we're looking at a WebSphere cell, and within that cell, we're going to be looking at a cluster. Okay, and then the whole concept of Rapid Deploy revolves around a deployment package. A deployment package really is the orchestration project effectively zipped up into a package. So it will contain all of the configuration that is required to deploy the application or the code artifacts, in this case for WebSphere an EAR file, to all of the target environments that can be deployed to, not only defining how to install that EAR file, but also, if necessary, to configure the entire environment that that's going to be deployed to. So for example, in a WebSphere cluster, that might involve actually creating or updating the cluster. It might involve creating some JDBC or JMS resources, heap sizes. Whatever you need to configure in WebSphere, or indeed outside WebSphere, would be included in this package for all target environments. Okay, so let's just quickly have a look at a project and see what is in a project. So basically, it's the orchestration. It's the steps that are performed on each target server. In WebSphere, as I said, you might open an EAR file, do some search and replace, close an EAR file, and then deploy that EAR file into a cluster, or indeed create the cluster and then deploy that EAR file into it. So it also contains a set of tasks that are actually running on the target server. And this is inside that orchestration. Each task is a piece of Java code that actually will run on a target server in an environment neutral way and then have environment-specific variables passed into it. There's also a log4j file. It's a standard Java log4j file. It's very simple to configure. And in there you can define the logging level. Typically, people will run in debug mode on the target servers, but you can set that to info if you want to, or trace, or whichever level you wish to use. And then we have the environment-specific configuration files. And these are the files that define that target environment that we're deploying to. Now, it might just define how, for example, in WebSphere, the EAR file is deployed into an existing cluster. So it might just define some attributes of the EAR file, like the class loading policy, for example, or the startup order. But it might additionally actually define the entire WebSphere cluster. And then today what we're going to show in the demo is the entire WebSphere cluster. So what will happen is it will define the way the EAR file is deployed and those parent first, parent last, or whatever it might be. But it will also actually create and stand up the cluster and all of the configuration items that we need inside that cluster and JDBC or JMS resources. But you can choose to do that all in one project, or you can choose to do that in two separate projects. And depending on how your architecture is defined, will determine how you will do that. Okay, and then we also have the possibility of including in the project a set of external resources. Now, typically, these external resources will be things like jar files, WAR files, or EAR files. So in the case of WebSphere, it will typically be one or more EAR files and potentially one or more jar files. Now, these are going to be stored outside of our project because they're probably going to be built by somebody else. They'll be the output of a continuous integration or build process that's going on elsewhere. And that build process can either directly copy the EAR file into our project, or at time of packaging the project into the archive file, the package, we can go out and get it, and we can get any resources from any target, either on the existing server or via remote wget commands or via SCP or anything else. So when we have got a project, we have a whole set of files which we've discussed, the URL library, a database library, a file, or anything, and they're all going to be stored in our SCM system. Okay, the SCM systems that we support are things like Subversion, Git, Mercurial, etc. And all of our files are stored and backed up in those. But today what we're going to show you is just using the very basic SCM repository, which is just a flat file system. So effectively no SCM. Okay, they're all compressed into a deployment package, which is what we've already discussed. And those deployment packages are stored somewhere in an artifact repository. Now, Rapid Deploy supports a number of artifact repositories. Typically, that will be Maven, Artifactory, etc., Nexus perhaps, and that can be local on the files on the server, or it can actually be remote. Today, we're going to use the out-of-the-box file system artifact repository, which means we're just going to store those artifacts in a flat file system. And what we're going to do to differentiate one set of artifacts from another is we give them a specific name. So, how are projects packaged? Well, here you can see we're seeing environment config A and environment config B, which we've just discussed. The XML file, the log file, and any external resources, they all go into a zip file, effectively. It could be jar, tar, or zip. And that package will contain all the configuration required to deploy to environments A and environments B. And we could call that version 1. That's the first package we create. Now, let's say we add some new environment definitions for environment configuration C. And we'll see this during the demo. We are going to create a new environment. So now we've got environment configuration A, B, and C. We're going to package that up into a zip file, version 2, and now we have a zip file which can be deployed to environments A, B, and C. So how are they deployed? Well, package version 1 with the first 2 environments, we can see that being deployed to environment A. And this deployment is via either SSH or a remote agent. And environment B. And today we're going to do all of our deployments to an AWS instance, so we'll be using SSH. So version 1 can't be deployed to environment C because when we created version 1, the environment C files hadn't been created. Now we're going to deploy version 2, and we can deploy that to environment A, to environment B, and environment C. And the important thing to note here, of course, is that if environment A, in fact, doesn't exist, and in this case, environment A may be a cluster inside a WebSphere cell, then that will be created. And the same for environment B and environment C. So everything required to create that environment is stored inside that package. Okay, so now we're going to look and move to a live demo. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is a binary installation of a WebSphere install. So effectively we're going to create a deployment manager and a node agent. Today, for simplicity, we're going to create them on the same node. It will federate those, and it will apply security. And it will do that on a new AWS instance, and I'm going to go into AWS and create that instance. Secondly, we are going to, after we've created that binary installation, we are going to perform a code and configuration deployment to an existing WebSphere cell, so not that first one that we created. And then we are going to clone that existing WebSphere configuration into the newly created cell and then perform that deployment. Okay? So let's just exit this at this point and start our live demonstration. And for this, first of all, I'm going to go into an Amazon console and just show you that I'm just basically going to create from this template, which is just an empty Linux template. I'm just going to launch this, and I'm going to say I'm going to create a large instance because it's WebSphere. So I'm going to launch it, and actually I'm going to edit the security groups because I need to add a rule to allow us to connect to that server on any IP address. So I'm quite happy with that, I think. So let's launch that. So I've got an existing key pair because I don't want to create one of those. So this is a key that allows me to connect via SSH. Oh, I need to acknowledge. Okay, so that's now launching. Okay, so that will take a moment or two to launch. And while that's launching, we'll just quickly go and have a look in Rapid Deploy at the project that we're going to use to connect to this. Okay, so let's go into our projects. And here I already have a WebSphere 8.5 provision project, so let's go and edit that. Now, we'll go and have a look at some of these details later, but to get this going, this is take quite a while to deploy this binary install. So I just want to get that out of the way, and then we can go through some of the things later. We have some existing environments here. And actually, the one that we are going to deploy is this one, WAS binary demo. I've already created it, but if we have a look at it, we can see all the values that are configured in here. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make this even better. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to recreate it. How about that? So let's delete that WAS binary demo. Okay, and now let's see, well, we've already got one here called CB prod. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm going to take that CB prod and I'm going to clone that to this new AWS environment. So The server I'm going to use is WAS binary demo. And that's just defining the definition of the connection that we're going to make to that server. And I will show you that in a moment. The other values I can just fill in. So I'm going to, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this environment. But one thing that I'm going to have to change is the name, is the host name of the target that we're connecting to. So if we go back into EC2, we should be able to go and look at the instance. And now that's now actually running. So what I'm just very quickly going to do first is I'm going to assign that an elastic IP. Okay? So I'm going to associate this with an instance, and we only have this one instance that's running. So I'm going to do that association. And this is the public DNS. So we're going to collect that public DNS. And we're going to go back into Rapid Deploy. I'm going to set it here. Okay. And we're going to create this environment. Okay, so we've now got that. Now, we've got that new environment, but remember that any packages that we've got previously don't have that new environment in them. So, of course, we now need to create a new package. So we've got 3 packages here, but this package will not have that new environment. So let's create a package. And now it's created package 004, and that should have within it that new environment. Okay, so let's go and have a look at AWS. We should have our running instance here. It should be associated. It is. And that's all running. So we should be able now to run a deployment. So let's run a job. And what this should do is install the WebSphere binaries on this box, as we said. Create a deployment manager and a node agent. Federate the node and set up security. I'll show you how that's going to do that in a moment. First, let's just get it going. Right, get through here. Okay, so these are all various things that I can do at deployment time. I can explain some of these later, but right now, I'm just going to run this deployment. Okay, so that deployment is now running, going over onto the target. We can view the logs. Okay, we can see it's doing things on that target. So first of all, let's go and have a look at the server that's actually deploying to. And the server is WAS binary demo. Now, I'd already set this up, of course, to point to the correct host name. And because I'd already configured that IP address, I knew what that was. And I didn't want to have to go through that because it would take too long to actually configure. But if we look at it, we can see here that it's a Linux box. It's going to copy items from us, from our Rapid Deploy server to a remote build store, which is target on the server that's always going to be there that we're going to copy anything over to, and that's just going to be /temp. But you know, in your organization, you might set that up to be a specific file system with a certain amount of size. And of course, we have the correct host name, and that's our elastic IP address in this case. But it would could just be the host name of any of your Linux or Unix servers or any cloud instance that you have. And then we're using SSH for the transport. This is where the PEM file is stored that we got from AWS, which allows us to make that connection without a username and password. But of course, if it was a standard Linux box, for example, we can put in a username and password, a passphrase, anything we like. We can also decide which version of Java on the target we're going to use if we're not going to use a default one. We can allow SSH to configure an agent on the target, and then from now on we can use an agent to do the deployment, which we might want to do. We can change file permissions of RD files, and what we can also do here, and this is the crucial bit, is although we'll be logging on as EC2 user, as you saw above, I actually want to do this WebSphere binary install as root. So this is now allowing me to run in an alternative execution mode, so it's using sudo to su2 root and execute the command. So the command sits between the starting and the ending parameters here. Of course, I can also set some environment variables up if I wish. Now what I could have done as well is I could have specified the cloud instance here for AWS, and then I could have synchronized and pulled all those details from AWS as well. And that's another way of doing it. Okay, so let's go and see how that job is doing. So that job is still running. And that job may take a while. So let's see what it's doing. So it's retrieving the files. It's 32% complete. So what I had, so the one little cheat that I did make in this demo is that AWS instance did have the WebSphere binaries already downloaded on it from the IBM website, because trying to download those binaries from the IBM website would probably have taken, with our connection, well over an hour. So, and in your case, of course, normally those binaries would be present by virtue of the fact that you'd have a cross-mounted file system if it was on your own internal system, or you might as well have an instance if you were using cloud or AWS or another cloud provider where you actually had those binaries on there. So this is basically unpacking those binaries and then doing the install, creating the profiles, and doing the federation. Okay, so now let's go and have a look at that project in a bit more detail. I promised I'd come back to that. So first, let's take a look at the orchestration. So this is all of the steps, the environment neutral steps that we said that really are the heart of the project and define what the project does. So the first step is test if WebSphere is installed, because if it is, obviously we don't want to do another install. Create the WAS home directory. So this make WAS home directory is actually calling a mukdir task. So we've named this specifically, but it's calling a mukdir task. And here you can see it's using what we call a data dictionary item. Now, these data dictionary items are the things that we inject into the deployment to make it environment specific. And they're the things that might change between environments. Now, when I cloned this environment when I cloned the environment that we're currently deploying from a previous one, I kept everything the same. The only thing I needed to change was the host name. But of course, in your environments, they might be more heterogeneous, and you might need to change more variables. But the point is, we have one orchestration, which is environment neutral, and these values are injected in and change for each deployment. But I would stress that it's important, if you're doing continuous delivery, to try and keep the environments as similar as you can. And if you can just change the host name, that's great, or the DNS name. The reason being, the less things that you've got that are different, the better, because you can much more easily isolate problems. You know you don't have any configuration differences between your environments, and everything is kept consistent. Okay, so again, we have a lot of tasks in Rapid Deploy, 300, 400, 500 tasks that you can call. So this is calling a check disk space task. So it's checking the disk space. And if we follow this down, we're calling a whole load of tasks. An IBM installation manager execute command task, which is installing the WAS binaries first of all. Then it's creating a deployment manager profile. It's then securing the SOAP client props file. So it's setting a admin username and admin password, profile path, setting a SOAP timeout. This is something, if you're a WAS admin, you'll be familiar with looking at the SOAP client props. All of this can be done through Rapid Deploy in a consistent manner. We're changing the owner then of the DMGR to be a non-root user, and probably EC2 user in this case. We're then starting the DMGR, creating the app server profile, securing the app server profiles, client props, SOAP client props files, again changing the owner, starting the app server, stopping the app server, doing some post-JVM changes, and then calling the finalization task. Okay, so that's effectively what we're running. Now, all of the configuration files, so the data dictionary files and any other config files we might need to back up this for each environment are stored in an SCM repository. Now, as we said, we're using a file system SVN repository, and this is the path on the Rapid Deploy server that we're using. But we could use also Subversion, Git, ClearCase, Rational Team Concert, whatever we want to use. Okay. Now, for the artifact repository, that's where we're storing those zip files that were actually containing all of that zipped up configuration of the project. Again, we're using just the local file system, but we could be using Maven, Nexus, SCP Remote, Artifactory. It depends which plugins I've got installed as to which ones I see here. And because we're using local file system, this screen looks different to how it would look for Maven or how it would look for any of the others. But all we need to specify is a location where we're going to store it, a promotion store, and we can use this if we want to keep our live deployment packages separate from our dev and test ones. And also, if we're sharing that location with other projects, a deployment package search string that enables this project to specify the packages that it wants to deploy over and above the others. We also have, here we have build plugins, so we can plug Rapid Deploy into a number of build engines. We haven't done that today, but we can do that. We can plug into Jenkins, and in fact we've got a webinar about how to integrate Rapid Deploy with Jenkins for continuous delivery, which is one you might want to look at. So I won't go into that. We have a product panel that really just defines the main product that we're deploying, so we're WebSphere 8 here. So you will see whichever products we have here are based on the plugins that you've got installed. And then we have the environments, and we quickly came to here before when we cloned these environments. You remember we cloned the CB prod into the WAS binary demo. And this defines each of the environments, and as you saw, each of the for each environment, the data dictionary items for that environment. And then we have the packages. And we create these packages either as a result of a build process for a code deploy probably, or we can create them manually through here to basically zip up all of that configuration as it changes over time and keep a history of it so that we can redeploy old versions, go forwards, go backwards, back things out, etc., etc. We can also define here which groups this project is a member of, because we do have the ability in Rapid Deploy. We have groups, roles, and users. We are role-based access, but also group-based. So if a project is a member of a group and roles are assigned to that group, then any users that are also assigned to that group will be able to perform those roles on those projects. Okay, so that was a quick overview of that. So let's go and have a look at the executing jobs once again. Well, I see that job is still going, unfortunately, and it does take a while to do the WAS install. See how it's getting on. Okay, well I think it's just installing the profile, and that can take a while. So what I'm going to do now actually is I'm going to jump out of this demo and just go on to the next piece that we're going to do. So we've looked at the binary installation, we've created a new AWS instance, we've assigned an elastic IP, we've created a new target definition by cloning an existing one, we've created a deployment package with that new definition, and we've performed a deployment, and that's currently running. So now what we're going to do is we're going to perform a WebSphere code deployment. It's going to deploy the Plants by WebSphere application, and it's also going to create a cluster and all of the other configuration for that environment. And then we'll have a quick overview of the deployment orchestration and have a look at the deployed application and check that we can actually log into it. Okay, so let's go out and do that. So if we go to Resources, Projects. So this time we're going to deploy this project. It's called WAS Deploy. And we're going to deploy it into a WebSphere cell. So first of all, let's go into that WebSphere cell and have a look and see what's in there. If we go and look in servers, server types, WebSphere application servers, we'll see that there aren't any. And neither are there any clusters. Okay, and I'm also just going to prove that actually we're looking at the JPretStore prod app. If I try and click on that, we should find that we can't connect. Indeed we do. So if we go into this WAS Deploy project, and we go and look at the environments that we have defined, we'll see that we've got a CB test, CB prod, and CB dev. And the one we're going to deploy is the CB prod 01 environment. And if we want to look at the configuration of that, we can. And we can look at all the data dictionary items that are defined for that. And here they are, and there are a lot of them. But of course, most of them won't change between environments. And I'll show you how you can make these auto-populate by the use of a template. Okay. So we can also look at some additional properties files that are created. So for example, we've got a text search and replace that we could look at. We've got an XML search replace we can look at, if there are any. There aren't. We've got some instance variables potentially. Here they are, some environment variables that we're setting. We've got some instant properties. And this is a Jython file that's auto-generated, which you can manually edit if you know what you're doing, which defines everything we're going to do in this environment. Okay. And you can do pretty much everything you can do in the WAS console through Rapid Deploy. So create anything you like. Okay, so let's go and let's go back. And let's have a look at the packages that we have. Okay, so we've got one package here that we can deploy. I'm just going to edit and just create one more package, because I'm not sure that all of my environments are in there. Okay, so we've got package 002. Now I'm going to use this quick link here to just go ahead and deploy that. We've got CB prod 01. I'm going to deploy it to that target. I'm going to skip to the finish. I see here that I can't go any further because I've got a late config to be configured. Now what this means is I can set any of those data dictionary items to not be set, so to be blank, and then at deployment time it will force me to check them. Now I can leave them blank, but I have to check them. And the reason to have this is you might not want to store certain values in your SCM tool, such as database passwords, for example, even encrypted. And Rapid Deploy allows you to encrypt all the values in any file stored on a file system, but your IT security may not allow you to do that. So I can leave those blank and enter them at deployment time, and they're only then ever stored in memory and never written to a file. Now, of course, they are actually written to a file in WebSphere, encrypted, but there's nothing I can do about that. That's within WebSphere. But Rapid Deploy allows you not to do that. Okay, so I'm going to accept that they're all blank. I don't care about those settings. And I'm going to skip to the finish. And I'm going to execute this request. And that deployment is now going to continue. So we now have 3 deployments running, and this deployment here is actually being deployed by somebody else. So Rapid Deploy is, of course, multi-user, and somebody else is doing a demo at this time. And so they're actually doing a deployment as well, and we could look at their deployment that they're doing. What I'm interested in looking at is this WebSphere deployment at the moment, so we can see what this is actually doing. So it's running an initialization task. It's expanding the EAR file. It's doing a search and replace inside the EAR file to basically change the header of the JPET-Store application to put the word prod in it. It's then going to collapse that EAR file, and it's then doing a WebSphere state change to stop the WebSphere cluster, and it's then going to do a WebSphere deployment. Now this WebSphere deployment task is just one task, but what it can do is hundreds of different operations. In this case, it's going to create the cluster, it's going to create the app server, it's going to create the virtual host, fairly simple, and then deploy the application into it. And then it's going to run an integrity check. And this is like a post-deployment check to just say, well, can I run some test that goes through the application to the database just to prove that end-to-end is all up and running and all working. But of course, you would probably want to run a lot of your different unit tests or, well, system tests in there as you wish. And if we could just go and have a look at the logs, we can see here that job is running quite nicely. It's now actually about to run the WebSphere cluster state change task. And you can see that running. Okay, so that's going. Oh, and so let's have a look at the okay, it's now doing the deployment. All right, so let's go back. And very quickly, what I want to do now is just show you I'm just going to go back into the WebSphere 8 provision and show you a facility where we can compare one package with the previous package. Now, if you remember, we created this new package when we created the new configuration. What I'm going to do is have a look at that package, select the left and right sides for those two, then I'm going to choose a plugin. So we have a bunch of plugins for performing comparisons. We're going to use Beyond Compare because it's my favorite comparison tool. And here we can see the comparison. Now, at the moment it's comparing timestamp. I don't really want to compare timestamp because I know that's probably going to have changed. So I'm actually going to just compare on size and checksum. And if we look in J2EE config, we can see here that these are the additional files that have been added. And there were our WAS binary demo ones. And if we look at the data dictionary, we can see that these are the values that we added. Okay? Great. If we now go back up, we can look in the manifest as well and see, of course, that the other thing that changed was we went from version 3 to version 4. Okay. So let's go back to have a look at those jobs. Okay, so this job is still executing. It's actually just starting the cluster. So it has actually completed the deployment. It's just starting the cluster. So if we now go into this WebSphere admin console, now WebSphere, as you probably know, is a little bit funny about refreshing. So I'm going to log out and just log straight back in again. I'm going to go to servers, server types, WebSphere application server, and there's our new cluster that's been, well, our new application server that's been created. It's called, we put the name cluster in there. There is the cluster that's running. And here is the application. We should also see here that that job is now completed. It has. And then let's just go now over to here and see if we can refresh this page. And there we have the pet store application. And now we can log into that pet store. Okay, so we can see that all of that has completed nicely. Right, now, how are we doing on the actual WebSphere deployment, the binary install? So this binary install is still chugging away in the background. So it looks like it's nearly finished. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll now go and say, okay, so we know we've done a nice deployment to our one cell that already existed. Let's go and clone that code and configuration deployment to this cell while we're waiting for it to finish federating. Okay, so let's go back into resources projects. Let's go back to that WAS deploy project. Okay, let's go to environments. So I like that. I know that JPET store app's running. I like the cluster. I know that's running. So we know that this is a good environment, prod. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clone this environment. And instead of the server display name being cbprodo1, I'm going to use the WAS binary demo server that we created before. So instead of connecting to that cbprodo1 server, I'm now connecting to the WAS binary demo server, which we did before. Okay, I'm happy with the project. I'm not going to use it to seed another project. And I have all of these data dictionary items, but you know what? I'm going to just leave them all exactly as they are, because I already used the same binary install project to provision my other environments, so I know that everything is in the same place. So actually, I don't need to change anything in this environment at all. So I'm just going to go next, and I'm going to create this environment. That'll write some files into our file system or our SCM tool if we were using one. And we see we've got that now. But of course, the packages we have don't have that environment. So I'm just going to create a new package. I'm just going to zip all that up and have our new environment. We've got that, version 3. Well, let's just go quickly back and see whether our executing job is completed or not. Oh, well, it looks like it has. So, first of all, let's quickly go into the WAS console of that environment, which wasn't there before, and see whether that exists. And you can see this is the, if you look back, you'll see that this is the IP address that we first put in, 165. So this is a brand new environment. Nobody has ever logged on to this Linux server, let alone this console. Nobody has ever logged on to it because it's a brand new one created through AWS. And we find that everything is there that we want. And what we should find in here is there's nothing existing. Indeed, there isn't. Okay, excellent. So, let's go jobs, new job. We're now going to deploy that package, WAS deploy, to our new environment, which is now showing up here. WAS binary demo. We're just going to skip to finish. Of course, it's probably going to ask us the same question. Yes, it is, late config. We're happy. We don't want to set any of those values. Next. Execute that request. Okay. And off that goes. And that's now going to deploy to that brand new WebSphere cell on a brand new server that we've just created. Okay, so while that's going, we'll just quickly go back and have a look at that WAS deploy project. I forgot to show you this front page. This defines some general settings. All projects must have an owner, which is a user within Rapid Deploy. It has an orchestration file name. This is defaulted, but basically you can have multiple orchestration, multiple projects pointing at the same area on disk, but having a different orchestration file name. So you might have a project that manages all of these WebSphere environments that does start, stop orchestrations, and you'd give it a different orchestration name, and then another one that does a deployment, another one deploys configuration, and all of those can point to the same area on disk so that they all use the same set of configuration files but perform a whole load of different tasks, right? So you don't have to have the same set of configuration files copied to perform different tasks. Right. And then I think we looked at the orchestration, etc. So I think we're happy there. One other thing that I was going to show you was the ability to, well, we've seen the ability to do comparison. So actually, let's go and look at this executing job. Really all we need to see is this job finish. We are on the WebSphere deployment task. I just actually will show you very briefly, although you're able to see these logs in real time, so we can always scroll back up and see what's happening, and you can see it being effectively tailed there. When we look at previous jobs, and I haven't shown you the previous job panel, we can always, of course, view or download. We can either download the log and view it in our favorite editor, or we can view it, and I'm going to just view this on an HTML page, and you can see the extensive logging that you get out of this. So this is showing the file transfers. It's showing the search and replace, so the injection here of all of the environment-specific values into our deployment, and you can see it always does them in a particular order. So if any names are parts of other names, it will always do it correctly. Here you can always see the versions of the plugins that are being copied over to the server or are being run for debug purposes. And here is the actual WebSphere deployment taking place. Okay, so let's just have a look at our executing job, if it's still running. Okay, it is still running. See where it's got to. Okay, so it's starting the cluster. So now if we go back to that, if we go back into here, which didn't have anything, and we refresh this, I'm going to log out and log back in, as I did before. We should now see that in this new cell, we now have, if I can get to it quickly, an application server. Well, it's just starting it up, so it's not running at the moment. But you can see that it has in fact created that cluster. And if we go into applications, application types, WebSphere Enterprise application, we can see we've got that JPEG store here. Prod is in there. I'm still waiting for it to start up. We'll give it a moment to start. But as soon as it's started, we should be able to log in to the JPEG store demo. So I'm just going to get rid of that one, which was from the other app. I'm going to go to this one. Oh, and there it is. So it actually has just finished. You can see that address, 165 again at the end, and there we are. So I think that concludes the demo. I will hand back to Andrew to just finish off. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard. A very, very extensive and interesting demo, so I hope you all enjoyed that. What we'd like to do now is just to finish off the session. So just checking the Q&A. It doesn't look like we've got any specific questions at the moment. Obviously, as a follow-up, we've obviously got the normal communication channels. You can check us out on the web at midvision.com. Obviously, email us. The point is, I suppose, a bit of an update from our kind of being recognised in the industry generally. In middle of April, there's an annual kind of exercise that Gartner go through, looking at software authors across the world. And we're pleased to announce that we've actually been recognised by Gartner as being a cool vendor for 2014, specifically for the area of DevOps. So the whole area of where we try to look at how do you underpin the goals of getting to a continuous delivery type of organisation and delivery process for your applications, using tools like Rapid Deploy effectively to get you into that kind of automation and make sure you can actually deliver things faster and release innovation faster to your business users. And obviously part of that is obviously how you set yourselves up organizationally. So there's this concept out there called DevOps about how you get the development team working in harmony with your operations team to deliver more, more stuff for your business teams and more often with less risk and in a safe way. So the other thing is that from people who actually haven't used Rapid Deploy in anger, then we actually have a community edition which actually allows you to use Rapid Deploy for up to 5 nodes completely for free. So if you check out our website, there's actually some links on there about how you can download that for free, and there's obviously online documentation as well we can provide. As we mentioned at the beginning of this session, this is currently part 4 of 5. Our next session we've got, which is scheduled for the 22nd of May, which is going to be around the same time, is going to be looking at the Enterprise Service Bus. So how you can use Rapid Deploy to address the needs to provision and manage the Enterprise Service Bus, or ESB, that you may have deployed in your enterprise architecture. So all it remains us to do is to say thank you very much for attending. Thanks very much to Rich for going through that very, very impressive demo. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.